I'd like to share some more things I wrote about narcissism and human evil. And this involves the narcissist's targeting of the human conscience through a thing called moral leverage. Human evil enslaves. It enslaves the spirit and it binds the soul. It blinds man to truth. Evil blinds man to truth about himself. It blinds man to truth about the world around him. It blinds man to truth about his Creator. Evil does not come from God. Not even a trace of darkness exists in God. He is pure light. Likewise, evil does not proceed from the man or woman who consistently allows the light of truth that is resident in his or her inner being influence over his or her outer being. Evil does, however, proceed from the man or woman who habitually rejects the light of truth that is resident in his or her inward man, and that light being the human conscience. One can recognize human evil by its indefatigable desire to possess, to dominate, to control other people. Human evil seeks to enslave. If it cannot enslave the body, it will enslave the mind. If it cannot enslave the mind, it will enslave the emotions. If it cannot enslave the emotions, it will enslave the spirit of man being the seat of godly intuition, wisdom, and discernment. If evil cannot enslave the spirit, it will enslave the conscience. It will seek to extinguish the very lamp of God from which springs our understanding of right and wrong. Now, in this study, I would like to focus on the malignant narcissist's effort to dominate through the targeting and manipulation of their victim's conscience. When the evil realize they can no longer effectively control their target by brute physical force or the threat thereof, all of these being overt forms of abuse, they must resort to a less conspicuous form of exploitation. It is all about leverage. In the wicked man's way of thinking, it comes down to recognition and utilization of the most effective forms of leverage with which to exercise dominion over the intended target. Take physical leverage, for instance. The bully leverages his advantage of physical size and physical strength to overpower his undersized victim. The overtly malignant parent's mindset toward the young victim is not much different than the schoolyard bully. The malignant parent understands he holds all the cards. He is keenly aware of the child's dependence for fulfillment of the most basic of physical needs, including physical safety, and has no problem taking full advantage of this dynamic. He or she has no problem exploiting the young child's helplessness and using it as a form of physical and emotional leverage. The malignant parent will exploit his size and strength advantage over the child and use it as a form of physical leverage. The malignant parent will exploit his role as provider and use this as a form of emotional leverage. The malignant parent, however, is faced with a dilemma as the victimized child progressively becomes less dependent on him for basic physical necessities. It is no less a dilemma for the narcissistic parent as the child matures physically and becomes less physically vulnerable. Physical leverage as a means of control becomes less tenable for the narc parent as the child develops to the point she is successfully able to defend and protect herself. What the malignant parent must have in order to fulfill his lust for dominion is a less tangible, a less perceptible means of leverage with which to control the targeted child. As the physical and intellectual playing field between the parent and child balances out, a new playing field, complete with new rules, must be developed. A new strategy must be implemented, one that will provide leverage the narcissist can exercise in order to maintain control, yet simultaneously conceal his nefarious aims. This dilemma facing the malignant parent, how to continue the abuse while maintaining plausible deniability, can be solved through an imperceptible form of coercion. A form of coercion not merely imperceptible to society and not merely imperceptible to those who may even be close to the victim, but a form of coercion imperceptible to the actual victim herself. Enter a type of leverage that is nearly impossible to discern, impossible to describe, and nearly impossible to defend. Enter the use of moral leverage. Leveraging morality to the abuser's advantage takes sophistication. It requires strategic thinking. It also requires a certain level of religious knowledge. The malignant parent, influenced by a wisdom that the Scripture calls devilish, will seek to crush the inner being of his or her victim rather than crush his outer being. Jesus described this process in the 23rd chapter of Matthew, the 3rd through the 5th verses. He said this. He said, they being the religious covert narcissists of his day, bind heavy burdens, grievous to be borne, and lay them on men's shoulders. But they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. Jesus was not referring to physical, natural burdens. He wasn't talking about strapping a backpack loaded with cast iron weights on another man's flesh and bone shoulders. He was talking about burdens that affect the unseen parts of a man. He was referring to burdens that abused the soul of a man. The word burden is defined as faults of the conscience which oppress the soul, according to Strong's Greek lexicon. And I believe Jesus used the word burden according to this manner, an oppression of soul caused by the faults of the conscience. I would rephrase this as an oppression of soul caused by a hyperactive conscience, even a deceived conscience. Hyperactive and deceived due to the weight of moral obligations placed upon it by unscrupulous men. Jesus brought to light a class of people who placed others under moral obligations designed to punish, to injure, and to exhaust the inner parts of a man. Moral obligations that ultimately caused spiritual and psychological enslavement. Now, in order for the evil to exercise moral leverage, they must have some power to establish a moral norm that would be most suitable to their agenda. It will be necessary for them to operate from a position that enables them to influence the moral culture of a family, a workplace, a community, or even the moral culture of an entire nation. They must have a degree of power. They must have followers. They must have an ideology to fall back on, be it religion or tradition, that seems to support a moral environment from which they can operate. These three dynamics must be in play for the narcissist to successfully employ moral leverage as a way to dominate his or her target. Power for the narcissistic parent comes in the form of his or her seemingly self-evident position of mother or father. This form of power is easy to come by. The power and subsequent responsibility of parenthood is automatically granted to an individual by virtue of their ability to produce a child. I don't think I exaggerate with this statement. Carte blanche power exercised over human beings completely helpless and dependent for survival, is bestowed with little scrutiny to people who meet one socially accepted criteria: the ability to make a baby. The ability of a man to fertilize an egg. The ability of a woman to carry the fertilized egg to fruition, culminating in the birth of a human being. The biological act of making a baby gives one or two individuals unimaginable power over the child they produced, power that can be exercised over the spirit, the soul, or the body. For the malignant narcissist to be in a position from which to advance a moral environment suitable to his or her aims, he or she must have power, and he or she must have followers. He or she must have at their disposal a following of people who purport adherence to the moral dictates that he or she may seek to establish. There must exist a group of people who share a commonality of belief in the virtue of the narcissist's moral sensibilities. These people, we might call them enablers of the narcissist, lend credence to his or her take on what is right or what is wrong. These are the ones who breathe life into the moral atmosphere created by the narcissist. Flying monkeys, golden children, enablers. All of these function to greater or lesser degree as priests of the narcissist. Priests who legitimatize the moral culture that has been framed by the narcissist. Priests who facilitate a moral platform from which the narcissist can successfully operate. Now let's do a quick review. The malignant man or woman requires 3 key things to establish a moral atmosphere from which to exercise moral leverage over his or her victim. First, the malignant individual must possess power. And I believe we established that this power comes almost automatically to the parents of children. Secondly, the malignant individual must have at his or her disposal a following. There must be a group of people, whether it be the golden children, enablers, or flying monkeys, who share a commonality of belief in the narcissist's moral viewpoint. Now let's look at a third element, religion. Religion. The evil must have a socially acceptable religion, ideology, or principle to fall back on. A socially accepted religion that legitimizes the moral environment that they seek to establish. Jesus addressed this very thing in the 24th chapter of Matthew, verses 4 and 5. He said unto them, "Take heed, watch out, be careful, that no man deceive you. Many are going to come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many." Now, for many years, I misapplied this verse, thinking that Jesus was saying that many would rise up claiming that they themselves were the Messiah. But I now believe his warning was that many would come acknowledging that Jesus, was indeed the Messiah, then proceed to invoke his name. Invoke his name, his reputation, and his doctrines for one specific purpose: to deceive. His was a warning to be on the watch for people who hid their true motives by claiming to be his followers. His was a warning to be on guard against people seeking to ensnare those who looked to Christ as their moral guide by falsely claiming Christ as their own. Jesus warned of a deception that targeted the human conscience. A deception made effective through the hijacking of his reputation and his teachings. Pretenders using his name to construct a moral culture suitable to their own agenda. A moral culture from which to exercise leverage over the conscience of the people, to burden the people with faults of the conscience which afflict the soul. Now, the ideology of materialism has been used much the same way as the Christian religion. The idea that material success equates to rightness has permeated much of our modern cultural mindset. We live in a society that places a high moral premium on the accumulation of wealth. The more things one possesses, the more right they are, according to the moral environment of the day. The less things one possesses, the more wrong they are. This materialistic moral climate does not affect the intellect or emotions of a man so much as it affects his conscience. It affects the way a man interprets his self-worth on the most fundamental of levels. And I think the non-religious covert narcissist recognizes this. He recognizes a moral environment, a moral atmosphere based on materialism that exists in today's society, and he exploits it to his advantage. He does this directly, perhaps through the withholding of material or money, through the threat of disinheritance, or through making his target dependent on him for material sustenance. Or the narcissist may exploit the current materialistic moral atmosphere indirectly. Perhaps he shames his target for their failure to accumulate stuff at levels considered acceptable by today's standards. Perhaps he shames his target for not taking hold of the so-called American dream. Any ideology, any religion, any norm of the day can be hijacked and misappropriated for the framing of a destructive moral environment. Now, a popular moral lever of today, and a powerful ideology that the malignant parent often employs to construct a moral atmosphere from which to leverage control over the conscience of his or her victim, is this idea of family before all. Family first. Loyalty to family above loyalty to anything or anyone else. The family first ideology is often impressed upon the conscience of the narcissist child from the moment they come into the world. And this is an ideology reinforced by many of our modern institutions. Multitudes of so-called Christian ministries embrace the idea. Countless Hollywood movies promote the idea. Mainstream television programs, from sitcoms to reality shows, legitimatize the idea. Corporations exploit the idea to sell their product. And the evil absolutely love this ideology of family first. It affords them opportunity to violate the boundaries of those who share their DNA with impunity. It offers seemingly indefensible moral leverage with which to shame the conscience of those who share their bloodline. Sadly, family first is a false ideology. Family first is an ideology based in fiction, based in man-made myths and traditions, not truth. In the eyes of truth, the concept of family is not based upon biological realities. In the eyes of truth, the concept of family is based upon spiritual realities. One's true family is based upon unseen reality. Not blood, not genetics, and not DNA. Now, Jesus addressed this ideology head on when he was put on the spot by his family as he was ministering one day. And I'll read this out of Luke chapter 8. Then Jesus' mother and his brothers came up toward him, but they could not reach him because of the crowd. And he was told, "Your mother and your brothers are standing outside asking to see you." But he answered, "My mother and my brothers are these who listen to the word of God and do it." Jesus equated family with the condition of a man or a woman's heart, not their bloodline. I think Jesus could just as easily have stated, "My mother and my brothers are these who listen to their conscience and follow it." My mother and my brothers are these who listen to truth and do it. Conversely, the message implied is this: though you gave birth to me, though you are recognized as my siblings according to the flesh, does not make you my family. And in one sentence, Jesus obliterated the predominant ideology of his day. And by doing so, he diffused the moral leverage his own biological family sought to exercise against his conscience. Thank you.